it's time to welcome our first guest, Peter Morici, professor of international business at the University of Maryland and one of the country's leading experts on economic policy and international economics. He's lectured at more than 100 institutions, including Columbia University, the Harvard Business School, and Oxford University. And of course, we're always proud and happy to have him back with us here on The Income Generation. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Nice to be with you.
So, okay, help me out with this here. All of a sudden on the news over the last week or so, we're hearing about the markets are nervous because of a recession, possible pullback in the economy, but yet when we were growing at 2%, we didn't hear about that. And now that we saw 4% GDP growth and 3.5% GDP growth in 2 consecutive quarters, now everybody's worried about a recession. What's going on? Why is that?
Well, a couple of things you need to remember is the Democrats put out a lot of good disinformation during the campaign and even last summer, that this is a sugar high, that it can't be sustained, that that's just a brief spurt of demand from consumers having more money in their paycheck. There seems to be complete denial that it'll do anything for business spending, when indeed it has. So that's a problem. The second thing is the stock market isn't overvalued on average. But it's the old story of 1 foot in fire and 1 foot in ice, and on average, I feel fine.
That's right.
I mean, the FANG stocks and a few other techs have done really, really well until the last month. But we're starting to hit a realization that several of these stocks have got real problems. Apple has no one left to sell these to. It's got every one of these in the hands of everybody who can afford to spend $1,000 that doesn't, prefer Droid's operating system overall. And so, it's now resorting to raising the price of a $600 phone, $150 at starter phone. It's absurd. Mm-hmm. Netflix, you have to see how they book their production costs. It kind of reminds me of the Krispy Kreme scandal several years ago, where they were booking franchise fees in one-time franchise fees in this year's revenue, not recognizing that it would go away next year, that it was a one-time thing. Instead, over there, they're not really booking their production costs. They're saying these shows are going to have residual value. That might have worked for CBS when they sold them for reruns, but who's Netscape going to sell their reruns to? Last I heard, that was Netscape.
Right.
And so if you go down the list, you start to see problems here and there. With Amazon and Google, it's the problem of antitrust. And also, Amazon doesn't make a lot of money selling stuff. They make a lot of money with their cloud services and so forth. Mm-hmm. That is not an infinite market. So my feeling is that a lot of these techs are not the growth stocks that they have been presented us to be. And the market is looking for new sources of leadership. Well, it's certainly not going to come from IBM, Sears, and General Electric. And so without those sources of leadership, and they're out there, but we haven't identified them yet, it makes the markets skittish. So you have all those kinds of things mixing around. And then, of course, you got the Chinese slow growth. And everybody, even people who grow tomatoes, are blaming the steel tariff for their troubles. Well, it's absurd.
So it sounds like to some extent the problem is we're getting defanged. And since some of the FANG stocks have led the market on the upswing, it's no surprise that what you're describing now is causing a pullback. But does that mean in your mind that, and I know you're not a stock picker per se, you're an economist, but in the minute or so we have left in the segment, tell us, does that mean in your opinion that you think finally maybe value will come back? Growth has been beating value in the stock market for 8 years. So maybe are we going to get back to basics a little bit now when it comes to stock picking? Is that your best guess?
Well, value, yes, but the question is who has value? We've written the internet out to its logical extremes, and the next 20 years is going to be defined by artificial intelligence. But who are the big artificial intelligence companies? Who are the companies that can monetize artificial intelligence? We know that IBM is big on artificial intelligence, but they don't know how to monetize it. The question is, who is going to monetize artificial intelligence? Is it going to be somebody like Waymo, which belongs to Google, or is it going to be someone else? We don't know. It's where we were with automobiles at the turn of the in the early 20th century, when we had 8 or 10 manufacturers and no one had yet emerged.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you think the answer is yes, except that
Yes, it is.
value is
But
likely
who's
to
got
get
value?
redefined, is what you're saying. So we need to leave it there for this segment. We need to take a commercial break. Peter, stay with us. And you stay with us too. We'll be right back here with more from Dave Scranton and Peter Morici on the income generation. We'll be right back. But now it's time to welcome back Peter Morici. Now, Peter, we were talking right before the break about how value might get redefined. So traditionally, you think of value stocks as things like perhaps utilities or some consumer durables, or maybe things that are temporarily out of favor. But what you're alluding to is that there's going to be a whole new generation of so-called value plays out there based upon artificial intelligence.
That's absolutely right. Artificial intelligence isn't going to be a robot knocking on your door that tells you I'm going to take your job, but rather it's going to be devices and software that assist you in doing your job more efficiently. It's Watson helping the neurologist or the oncologist diagnose 8 tough cases in a day instead of 4. It's the program that permits Peter Morici to have a student assistant to answer questions by phone that's not really alive. It's those kinds of things, but finding them is hard. Traditional sources of value are getting destroyed. They're not just running themselves to ground, they're getting destroyed. For example, somebody like Amazon is destroying the value at Procter & Gamble.
Sure.
Procter & Gamble is a low-key version of General Electric. There is nothing intrinsic about the overhead charged by corporate at Procter & Gamble, about the headquarters in Cincinnati, that makes all those various brands that it has accumulated over time, many of them by acquisition, more valuable. The marketing techniques that it had, the consumer testing techniques that it had, have been overcome by marketing analytics and by Amazon's ability to put all kinds of generic products on a platform that frankly beat the heck out of Tide, or at least not beat it in terms of its washing ability, but beat it in terms of being able to do your wash for less money.
Right.
And that happens over and over again. After all, what is Gillette going to do to sell you another razor? How many different ways are they going to make that head wiggle, and how many more blades are they going to put on? That's going on. Now, it doesn't mean that value is not out there, but it's much like the eclipse of the agricultural era, and in some ways the eclipse of a lot of mass production manufacturing. The margins in manufacturing are extraordinarily thin. That's why General Motors is worth so little relative to some other companies. But we don't know where they are yet. And after all, how many people successfully picked out Google, Amazon, and Apple when they were cheap?
Right, so the question becomes, if you really want to invest for value, you really want to invest in high dividend type holdings that are out of favor, you have to make sure that you're in commodities that probably won't get Amazoned, is what it sounds like for the most part. Peter, we need to take another commercial break, but when we come back
to that sort of thing.
When we come back from our commercial break, Peter, I'm going to ask you about the trade war, which you alluded to a few minutes ago, and I'm also going to ask you about taxes. You mentioned the Democrats at the beginning of our interview, and I'm curious to see if you think that maybe phase 2 of Trump's tax plan is actually going to be able to get through now that the Democrats haven't taken the House. So stay with us. We'll be right back with more from Peter Morici. Now it's time to welcome back for one final block, Peter Morici. Peter, I know you've been a big fan of phase 1 of the Trump tax cuts. We were able to get over 4% GDP growth one quarter, 3.5% the next. Is that going to be able to continue, in your opinion, for a while? And also, the Democrats taking over the House. What does that mean for phase 2 of the Trump tax cuts that was on the horizon?
Well, let's start with the second part. There is going to be no phase 2. The Democrats are interested in raising taxes, not lowering them.
I was afraid you might say that.
With regard to the continuation of the growth, it's likely to continue through next year. We can continue adding about 200,000 jobs a month by getting people off the bench, that is, people who left the labor market coming back, for about 12 more months. After that, we're limited by the intrinsic rate of growth in the adult population, which was determined by who had babies 18 years ago. And that's about 0.5% a year. That's about 65,000 new workers a month, depending on the participation rate. So in order to continue growing at, say, about 3% next year and the following year, we are likely going to need about 2.5% productivity growth. We haven't had sustained periods of 2.5% for a long time. But in this year, we've had 3% over the first 3 quarters. Amazing.
Right.
And the question is, how much of that is because of something fundamentally new, like the invention of the railroad, mass production, artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is popping up everywhere.
Right.
If you go to the Giant here, that's the grocery store in Washington, you find that there are still 12 checkout ladies, running stuff through, but there's also 12 checkout kiosks where you just scan the stuff yourself and one person supervising them. That's artificial intelligence.
Sure.
And that doesn't make that one person 12 times as productive because people are kind of slow at it, but it makes it 6 times as productive.
So I get
How
that.
much of that is out there?
It's the increase in technological advances, efficiency that are going to help us move forward. But so let's change subject one more time. We have about 1 minute left in this block, and we have to say goodbye. In the last minute, tell us, trade war. Can we win the trade war if we don't get a truce here?
We're not going to get a truce very likely, but you're really asking me what's inside of Donald Trump and Mr. Z's heads. I mean, they're certainly no closer on the issues, but the trade war really hasn't kicked in. The yuan is depreciated more than 7%, so it's wiped out most of the effect of the 10% tariff on most of the products. And a lot of companies are blaming the tariff for all kinds of problems, and the Wall Street Journal is very good at writing up anecdotal examples. But the trade data overall shows very little impact from the tariff yet, except in the 25% sectors of steel. I mean, the 25% tariff on Chinese automobiles. Who buys Chinese automobiles in the United States? I don't.
Sure. Doesn't affect us.
I don't think you do either, and I guess I'll give you $100 if you can find one.
So I guess we got to wait and see what ends up panning out. Hopefully, we can get some kind of truce, or we can get the upper hand here. Peter, thanks so much for being on the show. We've got to leave it there for now. It's great having you once again, and you stay with us. We'll be right back here on The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton.